a boy who stopped speaking after his mother's death, a retired K9 once broken by war. They meet at an airport, strangers to each other, until the dog chooses him. What begins as quiet companionship unravels a hidden past, a crime long buried, and a connection deeper than blood. If stories about healing truth and the bond between human and animal speak to you, like and subscribe. This one might stay with you. The airport was louder than usual even for a Friday evening. JFK bustled with the weight of delayed flights, last-minute travelers, and impatient announcements spilling from overhead speakers. But amidst the chaos, a 13-year-old boy with messy brown hair and a red hoodie stood unnervingly still near Gate 42. His name was Ethan Ward. His hands clutched the handle of a cheap scuffed carry-on, and a notebook peeked out from his hoodie pocket, soft-edged from being opened and closed too often. The notebook had his mother's handwriting all over it. He had been planning this for months, not to run away, not exactly, but to find silence. Or maybe just a moment where everything didn't feel like it was pressing on his chest. Since his mother passed away 8 months ago in a car accident, Ethan had spoken less and slept worse. His father, whom he barely knew, had full custody now. And if silence was what Ethan craved, then that man's house was made of noise, shouting, drinking, endless disappointment. Ethan had memorized the flight schedule on the wall near the international departures. Paris, his mom's dream. She never made it there. He figured if he could just get on that flight, maybe he could leave the weight behind. Maybe, just maybe, the grief would loosen its grip. He had enough money for a cheap standby ticket scraped together from birthdays and forgotten drawer bills. He had packed only her scarf, the notebook, and a sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of her perfume. No one had noticed him in the airport so far. That was his plan, to be invisible. He had always been good at that, until he reached the TSA checkpoint. Next, the officer said, barely glancing up. Ethan stepped forward. His hands shook slightly as he passed over the forged note he'd printed from a library computer, a poorly made copy of a boarding pass that he hoped would be good enough in the flurry of the crowd. The officer's eyes narrowed. Before he could say anything, a bark, sharp, clear, but not aggressive, cut through the tension. Ethan's breath caught as he turned. A large German Shepherd lean, scarred near the hind leg, its badge-marked K9. Max was walking straight toward him, its handler trailing behind, but the officer didn't seem alarmed. Max wasn't barking now. In fact, he was calm, focused, curious. And then the dog did something strange. Max sat directly in front of Ethan. Not in a threatening way, not like a trained attack posture. He simply sat, lifted his nose, and nudged Ethan's hand with it. Then, gently, almost mournfully, licked the back of his hand. The handler frowned. "Max? What the hell are you doing?" He tugged the leash slightly, but Max didn't budge. His eyes locked onto Ethan's deep brown, alert but soft. Ethan didn't pull away. He couldn't. I'm not hiding anything." Ethan mumbled, his voice dry. The TSA officer checked the boarding pass again and handed it to the handler. The man whistled low. "This ain't legit, kid." Ethan nodded. He wasn't about to argue. There was no plan for this part. His throat clenched. But the handler wasn't yelling. He crouched down instead, his eyes watching Max more than the boy. "This is weird," he murmured. "He usually only reacts like this to..." "To what?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. The man looked at him. "Grief. Sometimes trauma. We trained Max for bomb detection, but he's different. Sensitive, especially since he came back from deployment." Ethan lowered his gaze. He felt his fingers twitching toward his pocket, toward the notebook, toward her words. But he said nothing. They took him to a small room near security. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just an officer, a social worker on the phone, and Max, who refused to leave Ethan's side. "Do you want water?" the officer asked. Ethan shook his head. Max rested his chin on the boy's knee, unmoving. Like a statue, like an anchor. They asked him about his father, about the forged pass. Ethan gave short answers. His eyes drifted to Max every few seconds, as if tethered there. After a while, the social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman in a navy coat, but kind-eyed. "He hasn't run before," she said to the officer. but the school counselor did mention some withdrawal since the funeral. I don't want to go back," Ethan whispered, interrupting. The room fell quiet. Even Max seemed to freeze. "You're not in trouble," the social worker said gently. "But you can't travel alone. We'll figure something out, okay?" Ethan didn't respond. He leaned down, pressing his forehead lightly against Max's fur. The dog didn't move. He simply closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Ethan didn't hear it. He was busy breathing in the smell of old fur and metal. Somehow, it made him feel safe. The room where Ethan sat felt colder now, though nothing had changed in temperature. Maybe it was the silence that settled after the social worker left to make a call, or maybe it was the weight of knowing he'd been found out. Still, Max didn't move from his place beside him. The dog's steady breathing was the only rhythm in the room, like a lullaby too proud to hum out loud. Ethan kept his fingers on the fur between Max's ears, gently twisting a few strands back and forth. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone or something just stayed. Outside the glass window, Officer Tom Caldwell, Max's handler, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them both. He hadn't seen Max do that with anyone. Not since the desert, not since Afghanistan. Max had been one of the sharpest dogs they'd ever trained. Dual-purpose narcotics and detection, but his true skill had been anticipation. Max didn't just react, he sensed preempted. On his best days, Max had outperformed every other K9 in the unit. On his worst, he'd frozen. Stiff, silent, useless. It started after Corporal Henson Max's military partner was killed by an IED during a morning patrol. Max had been the first to reach him, dragging his limp body back toward the convoy with torn paws and a cracked rib. Everyone called it loyalty. What followed wasn't as heroic. After that, Max stopped barking during alerts. He wouldn't chase suspects, wouldn't bite. The vet said it was trauma, some kind of canine version of PTSD. They retired him early. Too much damage, not enough trust. And yet, Officer Caldwell couldn't give him up. He pulled strings and got Max into airport security duty, low, threat-predictable noise, wide-open space. Still, Max hadn't bonded with anyone since. Not until now. Caldwell stepped into the room slow and calm. "Ethan," he said, crouching near the table, his eyes never leaving Max. "I think you've made a friend." Ethan didn't lift his head. "He's not like other dogs," he said softly. "I can tell." Caldwell smiled faintly. "No, he's not. Max served overseas. Military dog. Saw things no animal should ever see. Lost someone he trusted." Ethan's fingers paused. He finally looked up. So did I. That moment hung in the air like a thread stretched tight. Caldwell shifted his weight. "He hasn't done this with anyone else. Not since he came back. We've had him for a year, and he barely lets the team touch him, but he walked right up to you." Ethan looked at Max, who blinked once and leaned slightly closer as if nudging toward the warmth of the boy's side. "Why me?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Caldwell said honestly, "but sometimes broken finds broken." There was no judgment in his voice, no pity, just observation. Like Max Caldwell had seen grief enough times to recognize it without needing names. He nodded at the notebook peeking from Ethan's hoodie. "That your mom's—" Ethan hesitated, then pulled it out, holding it with both hands like it was made of glass. "She wrote in it every night, dreams, stuff she wanted to do." Caldwell kept his eyes soft. "She ever make it to Paris?" Ethan shook his head. "No. She used to say she'd go when I turned 15. Said we'd watch the Eiffel Tower sparkle together." Caldwell glanced toward the window, then back to the boy. "You were trying to finish the trip for her?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. I just wanted to feel close to her. My dad, he doesn't get it. He gets angry when I talk about her. Says remembering is weakness." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "That's not true. Remembering is surviving." Max shifted again, this time lying fully against Ethan's leg, pressing his weight gently as if anchoring him. Ethan didn't move. He let it happen. He closed his eyes for a second and exhaled. Not a cry. Not a breakdown, just a release like someone had finally taken their hand off his chest. Caldwell stood up. "We'll have to call your dad, but you're not in trouble. I'll make sure you get something to eat first." "Okay." Ethan nodded slowly. "Can Max stay?" The question came out almost like a whisper. Caldwell paused, then grinned. "That's up to Max." But Max was already resting his head on Ethan's lap. They let Ethan stay in the airport overnight in the staff lounge while they waited for Child Protective Services to coordinate with his father. Caldwell stayed nearby. Max refused to leave. That night, while the city lights blinked beyond the runway and the humming of cleaning machines echoed faintly, Ethan lay curled on the small leather couch with a thin blanket draped over him. Max lay on the floor directly below, one paw touching the blanket's edge. The notebook rested on Ethan's chest. He had finally fallen asleep. Caldwell stood just outside watching through the narrow glass panel of the door. "You've picked someone," he murmured to Max, though the dog couldn't hear. "After all this time, you chose him." He leaned back against the wall. He thought about the day Max came back from the field covered in blood and dust, refusing to let anyone near Henson's body. He remembered the way Max had howled for the first and last time, a sound that wasn't pain but mourning. Since then, Max hadn't made a sound unless forced. His silence wasn't compliance, it was grief. The next morning, as daylight broke and airport staff trickled in with coffee and yawns, Ethan stirred. He blinked at the sunlight crawling through the blinds. Max was already awake, alert, but still beside him. Ethan sat up and scratched behind Max's ear. "Thanks," he said quietly. Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. His presence was answer enough, but the peace didn't last long. The knock on the door came sharp, 3 quick taps followed by the click of the handle. A tall man in a gray coat stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room quickly and landed on Ethan. His expression was not relief. It was cold, unreadable. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "Dad," he said flatly. The man didn't move toward him. "Get your stuff," he said, not unkind but firm. "We're going." Max stood placing himself slightly between Ethan and the door. The ride back to Ethan's father's house was long filled with awkward silence and the humming of tires over cracked city roads. Max sat in the back seat beside Ethan, his body still and watchful, occasionally glancing towards the boy as if reading his every shift and breath. Ethan didn't speak during the drive. His father didn't ask questions. He just gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale against the leather, muttering once under his breath about how this kind of thing couldn't happen again. But Ethan wasn't listening to him. His eyes stared out the window, but his mind was back in the staff room, back in that quiet moment when Max had rested his head on his lap. That night had been the first time Ethan had slept for more than a few hours since the funeral. He'd dreamed again, the same dream he'd had for weeks. There was a sharp sound barking echoing through rain, a red scarf soaked. Glass, and that same bark low urgent vibrating in his chest. He had always woken before seeing what it meant. He used to think it was nothing more than his mind replaying trauma in symbols. But now, after seeing Max after that connection, he wasn't so sure. When they arrived, Ethan stepped out slowly. His dad slammed the trunk shut after dropping Ethan's bag on the porch. "I've got work," he said gruffly. "Don't lock the damn dog in." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Max followed him inside, steps light but precise, sniffing slightly as they entered the dim living room. The house was clean but cold in tone, like a place that was meant to be temporary. No photos, no warmth, no signs of a life built with care. Just objects in corners and a silence that echoed too loudly. Ethan dropped his bag by the couch and took the notebook out of his hoodie pocket. It had never left his side. He flipped it open to the last page his mother wrote on. There was a small faint circle drawn in the corner, barely visible, with letters beside it. MA 13. At the time, he hadn't understood what it meant. A code, a flight of memory. She didn't leave any explanation. Max wandered into the room and sat quietly at Ethan's feet. Something about the way the dog moved his awareness, his timing, it stirred something again in Ethan's chest. He leaned down and looked at Max's collar, brushing aside the security badge. There it was, a thin metallic tag scratched with the letters K9MA13. Ethan blinked. His fingers traced the engraved letters slowly. It couldn't be a coincidence. He pulled the notebook closer, held it next to the tag. Same shape, same spacing. The same subtle curve in the way the A was written. His heart pounded. He looked into Max's eyes. "Did you know her?" he asked, voice just above a whisper. Max tilted his head slightly, ears twitching as if in recognition, then nudged the notebook with his nose. Not random, not an accident. Ethan scrambled to his backpack and took out his mom's old scarf, the one she wore that night. It still held a faint trace of the perfume she used, lavender and smoke. He held it out. Max sniffed it once, then froze. His entire body stiffened, then slowly sat back, ears forward, alert, but not aggressive. Ethan watched, breath caught in his throat. The same reaction Max had at the airport. Except now it wasn't toward him. It was toward a memory. That night, after his father fell asleep on the couch, beer can tilted in his hand, Ethan slipped out the back door with Max in tow. The streets were damp as if it had rained just hours earlier. They walked for blocks in silence. Max, close by, never pulling on the leash, never straying. They stopped at the overpass where the accident had happened, the one that took his mother's life. The metal guardrail still bore faint scratches where the vehicle had hit. No flowers, no candles, just cold, wet steel. Ethan crouched by the edge, staring at the dark patch of road where the streetlight flickered. "She was coming home late," he murmured. "They said she lost control, but she never drove fast, never." Max stood beside him, quiet. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, his nose sniffing the air, then lowering to the ground. He moved in a slow pattern, tight circles near the edge of the road. Ethan stood watching. Max stopped. His paw scratched at a small dent in the asphalt, then barked. Once. Sharp. Clean. Ethan's breath hitched. That bark, the one from his dreams. It was the same pitch, the same rhythm. "It was you," he said, wide-eyed. "You were here that night." Max looked up at him, calm but unwavering. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was memory. The tag, the bark, the dream. Max had been part of the rescue unit that night, which meant he had seen her. Maybe even tried to save her. Maybe that's why he came to Ethan at the airport. Maybe he remembered. The scent, the notebook, the echo of grief in a child's heartbeat. Ethan sat on the curb, arms wrapped around his knees, the scarf tangled between his fingers. Max lay down beside him, pressing his body against Ethan's side as if grounding him to the earth. For the first time, Ethan didn't cry. He just breathed. Long, steady, hollow breaths. He wasn't alone in remembering anymore. The loop, the dream that had haunted him for weeks, was not fiction. It was a replay, a call across time. And Max had answered. He looked at the dog again, almost afraid to ask. Did she say anything? Max blinked slowly, then rested his head on Ethan's foot. The days that followed blurred together into something numb and shapeless. Ethan no longer counted hours between meals or arguments with his father, and the house itself seemed to exist on autopilot. Max never left his side, moving from room to room with a quiet loyalty that never demanded but always offered. At night, Ethan often found himself curled up on the floor next to Max's large frame, breathing in the slow, steady rhythm of a dog that had known war loss and now him. But something about the dream had changed since they visited the crash site. It no longer ended with the bark. Now, Ethan saw flashes, headlights, metal, then red. A coat sleeve. The sleeve his mother wore that night, always that sleeve. He remembered how she had thrown her coat over him when they were stuck in the rain just months before the accident. The memory clawed at him until it hurt. That morning started like most. Ethan woke before his father fed Max and sat silently by the kitchen window while the television murmured in the background. But today, something pulled at him, an urge to look for something he had tried to forget. He went into the hall closet and pulled out the small, scuffed, navy blue suitcase he had taken to the airport. It hadn't been opened since the security officers returned it after stopping him. Ethan sat on the floor, hesitating. Max came over and sniffed at the edges. When Ethan unzipped it, the scent hit immediately, something musty coppery wrapped in memory. He reached inside and pulled out the old beige trench coat. His mother's. It was exactly how she had left it. One sleeve still folded slightly from the way it was tossed over a chair, the collar stiff from dried blood. Ethan hadn't known, or hadn't let himself look close enough before. But now, with Max sniffing the coat and then whimpering softly, the reality forced its way in. The coat still bore the stain, dark rust-colored near the ribs. From that night. From her final breath. He hugged it close before pushing it back into the suitcase. Max paced once and sat down, his gaze locked on the case now. That was the beginning of the problem. Later that day, Ethan was allowed to go with Max to the airport again. Caldwell had offered to let Ethan shadow part of his routine at security. It was informal, unsanctioned, but quietly supported by the few officers who'd come to respect Max's strange healing bond with the boy. Ethan brought the suitcase, wanting to return it to Caldwell's car afterward. It felt like a way to close something. He didn't plan on opening it again. They reached Terminal C, where Max was scheduled for his usual walkthrough near the international gates. As passengers formed lines and prepared for the long shuffle through TSA checkpoints, Ethan stood near one of the benches, suitcase beside him, Max leashed but alert. What happened next unfolded too fast and too slow at the same time. Max pulled sharply toward the suitcase. Not once, not subtly. He let out a low bark, then another. Sharp. Focused. His posture snapped into that old K9 training legs, braced ears pinned bark, escalating to a warning growl. A nearby officer noticed and raised a hand. "Is that your bag?" he asked Ethan. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but he's just reacting to my mom's coat. Not step back from the bag, please." The officer cut in hand, moving toward his belt. Other travelers started to notice. Some pulled their children closer. A few stepped away quickly, glancing at the dog now, tense head lowered like he was about to spring. "No, he's not alerting to danger," Ethan said, panic rising. "It's not a bomb, it's just her coat, my mom's." But the officers didn't know Ethan. They didn't know Max the way Caldwell did. To them, this looked like a K9 unit hitting on a possible explosive. They moved fast. Within moments, 2 more officers had joined, forming a loose barrier around the bag. Caldwell arrived breath-quick, voice calm but firm. "Max, stand down." The dog stopped barking but stayed rooted beside the suitcase. Caldwell looked at Ethan quietly. "Is there anything I need to know in that bag?" Ethan's face flushed. It's the coat from the night she died." "I didn't wash it. I didn't want to lose the last piece of her." Caldwell exhaled slowly. "Let me look." Ethan nodded. The other officer stepped back slightly as Caldwell knelt and opened the suitcase. He lifted the coat, carefully unfolded it, and paused. His eyes locked on the bloodstain. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was low. "You kept this all this time?" Ethan nodded. "I don't know why. I just couldn't throw it away." Caldwell stood and turned to the others. "False alarm, emotional scent marker. Let the dog stay." The other officers didn't argue, but the damage was done. Whispers among the travelers. Glances. A child crying softly behind her mother's legs. Ethan stood frozen, his face burning. Max came over and pressed his head against the boy's knee again, quiet and calm now. Later, in the staff break room, Ethan sat with the coat folded neatly in his lap. Caldwell brought in 2 cups of vending machine cocoa. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "I didn't think he'd bark. He knew it was just my mom's. I don't get it." Caldwell leaned forward. "He wasn't barking at the coat. He was trying to protect you from something you weren't ready to look at." He sensed something deeper. Ethan ran a hand over the fabric. "Why did it scare them so much?" Caldwell looked at him, because when a dog like Max barks like that, people trust him more than they trust words. Ethan didn't reply. His hands clenched around the coat. The bloodstain stared back like a question he'd never dared to ask. Max lay near the door watching. Quiet. Still. Ethan whispered more to himself than anyone. what really happened that night. Max didn't move. The coat stayed folded on Ethan's lap long after the cocoa went cold. He didn't notice the taste had turned bitter or that Max hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. Caldwell sat nearby, his phone in hand, occasionally replying to messages but mostly watching the boy and the dog as if trying to solve a puzzle too delicate to force open. The airport, despite its usual chaos, had faded into background noise. But not for long. A knock at the break room door brought back the tension. A middle-aged man in a Navy security uniform stepped in tall and lean, with the deep crow's feet etched into the corners of his eyes and a soft limp in his right leg. He looked at Caldwell, then at Ethan, and finally at Max, his gaze freezing. "I know that dog," the man said quietly. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "You sure Max has been assigned here for over a year before that military?" The man stepped closer. "I was a field responder. Used to work accident scenes before they pulled me off road duty. I was there the night that car went over the barrier on Madison Bridge. 8 months ago." Ethan stiffened. His fingers tightened around the coat. The man kept looking at Max. "We had a K9 unit on scene before EMS even got there. Dog got there with a reservist detail. We were stretched thin that week. The handler got injured, but the dog, he stayed. Wouldn't leave the woman's side." Caldwell looked at Max. "You think that was him?" The man nodded slowly. He had the same scar above the left paw, and the way he laid down one leg, tucked the other angled, it's burned into my memory. I remember thinking, damn, this dog isn't just trained, he's mourning. Ethan's voice cracked through the silence. She was still alive. The man turned, softening. She had a pulse when we arrived. Weak, but there. The dog, he kept licking her hand. Gently, over and over, like he was trying to keep her present, or comfort her. That's not protocol, but no one stopped him. Ethan's eyes filled, and he looked down at Max, who now shifted slightly, placing his head against Ethan's thigh and letting out a low exhale. The boy whispered, "He does that to me, too." I thought it was just something he did. The man's face was gentle now, the way people look at things that deserve more kindness than they've received. I remember one of the medics said something strange. He said it looked like the dog was saying goodbye for her, that she didn't speak, but she moved her hand toward him once before going still. The weight of the room shifted. The timeline clicked into place like pieces of a clock long buried. Max wasn't just any K9. He wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't randomly assigned. He had been there. He had known her. He had tried to save her. And now he was here with Ethan, licking his hand the same way, sitting the same way. No handler could have trained that kind of repetition. It was memory. It was grief. It was love carried over. Ethan pressed his hand over his chest, trying to stop the wave building behind his ribs. His breath caught. He's the last one who saw her. Caldwell cleared his throat gently. "You sure it's the same dog?" The man nodded again. "Positive. I stayed with her until EMS loaded her in. I remember looking back and seeing that dog sitting at the back of the ambulance tail, still eyes locked on the doors. Never seen anything like it in 15 years. Ethan stood slowly. Max rose with him. The room felt too small, like the air had thinned. He reached down, letting Max nuzzle into his palm, and whispered, "You knew her. That's why you came to me." Max licked his hand again. Just once. Slow. Deliberate. Ethan broke. He dropped to his knees, arms wrapped around Max's neck, burying his face into the thick fur as tears spilled soundlessly. He didn't sob or shake. He just held on. Max didn't move. His eyes stayed half-lidded, his body still, but firm, offering every inch of comfort he had learned to give. Caldwell turned to the man. "Thank you for saying something." The man nodded, stepping back. "He's a good dog. Whatever happened that night, he carried it." He left quietly, the door clicking shut behind him. Later, Ethan sat against the wall. Max curled against his side and the coat once again resting on his lap. "I used to think that night was a blank," he said softly. "Like my brain protected me by erasing it. But it didn't. I just didn't want to see what was there." Caldwell remained quiet, watching from a few feet away. Ethan continued, I think she was waiting for someone to find her. I think he did. He looked at Max. I think she didn't want to be alone. The memories weren't blurry anymore. They were sharp now, fragments rising like glass underfoot. He remembered the way the streetlights blinked through the back window as he waited in the car for her to come back from picking up dinner. He remembered the silence when she didn't return. The rush, the noise, the bark that cut through it all. He had heard it from the embankment. One bark, then another, the sound that filled his dreams. It wasn't just a nightmare. It had been real. Max had been calling for help. Ethan remembered crying in the back seat, pressing his palms to the window as figures moved outside. Someone had wrapped him in a blanket. Someone had said she didn't make it, but no one told him about the dog who stayed. No one told him she wasn't alone. Until now. Max lifted his head and placed his paw gently on Ethan's knee, the same way he'd done at the accident scene, the same way he had said goodbye. The shift in Ethan's understanding weighed heavier than anything he'd ever carried. After learning Max had been there with his mother in her final moments, something inside him both unraveled and reformed like a wound breathing for the first time after being stitched shut. But that night when he returned home, everything felt louder. The quietness of the hallway, the hum of the fridge, the faint creak of the floorboard near the stairs. Every sound felt intentional, suspicious, like a whisper daring him to remember more than he wanted. His father, or rather stepfather, sat in his recliner with a half-finished beer and an old sports channel muttering in the background. The man hadn't spoken much to Ethan since the airport incident. He never did, unless it was to correct or criticize. But tonight he barely acknowledged Ethan's entrance. Max followed the boy into the room, then stopped. Not because of the man, but because of something else. Something Ethan couldn't see yet Max seemed to feel. Later that week, Caldwell invited Ethan back to the airport to continue shadowing the K9 patrol. They had developed a quiet rhythm, Max, trotting confidently ahead Ethan, just behind clipboard in hand, as if pretending to be part of the unit. The routine soothed him, gave structure to emotions too big to hold. But that day, as they passed Gate B6 on the upper level, Max suddenly froze. His ears shot up. His tail stiffened. Without warning, he let out a low growl that morphed instantly into a deep, furious bark loud enough to make passengers turn their heads. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Max lunged toward the left corridor where a line of travelers approached international check-in. Max Caldwell barked, reeling him in with the leash, but the dog's eyes were locked on a man in a sharp black suit walking briskly past the gates, a rolling duffel in one hand and dark sunglasses hiding half his face. Max growled again, pulling against the leash with a strength Caldwell hadn't felt in months. "Who the hell is that?" Caldwell muttered, scanning for airport security. But Ethan didn't need to look long. His stomach dropped as the man passed under the fluorescent lights, and the angle revealed his jawline the way he walked, the slight scar above his temple. "That's him," Ethan said, voice brittle. "That's my stepfather." Caldwell's eyes flicked back to the man, then to Max, then to Ethan. "You sure?" Ethan nodded, his body tensing. "I thought he was at work today." Caldwell keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Caldwell. We've got a possible ID check on a traveler heading toward International Gate 18. Black suit, black duffel sunglasses. K9 alert triggered, and the boy with me just ID'd him as a known individual." Max barked again, and this time it wasn't just urgency, it was rage. "What's his name?" Caldwell asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "David Lanford. My mom married him 3 years ago. And you live with him?" "I did, after the accident." "He's your emergency contact?" Ethan nodded again, slower. "I always thought it was weird that he never went to the hospital that night. He said he got the call too late." Caldwell didn't answer. His focus was already on the officers converging at the gate. One of them approached the man who resisted at first, then handed over a passport. The officer squinted, looked at something on his device, then said something Ethan couldn't hear. That's when everything cracked. Within seconds, 2 more officers closed in. The man resisted, tried to pull away, but it was no use. He was pushed against a wall bag, seized, and within minutes walked away in cuffs. Ethan's heart hammered. "What's happening?" Caldwell radioed again, and this time the dispatcher's voice came back faster, confirming false identification document. Subject attempted international boarding using an altered Canadian passport. Real ID belongs to a deceased man reported missing 2 years ago in Vermont. Caldwell looked at Ethan. "Your stepdad just tried to leave the country under a dead man's name." Ethan blinked. "Why?" "That's what we're about to find out." They brought Ethan into the security office not as a suspect, but as a connection point. Max stayed pressed against his side as the officers replayed the gate footage on a small screen. There, plain as day, was David Lanford looking over his shoulder before handing his forged passport to the attendant. His face was composed, but his hands trembled. One officer brought in the duffel bag. Inside were 2 burner phones, a large amount of cash, and a folder filled with documents including old insurance forms from the car crash. He filed a supplemental claim 6 days after the funeral, the officer said. Said it was part of a wrongful death settlement. Caldwell frowned. But he wasn't the legal next of kin. That would have been Ethan. The other officer nodded, which means he forged that, too. Ethan watched the screen numb. His stepfather, who always acted distant, impatient, and cold, hadn't just been emotionally absent. He had been covering something. Caldwell asked gently, "Did he ever tell you how she died?" Ethan hesitated. He said she lost control, that it was an accident. But when I asked why she was out so late, he got mad. Said I should stop asking questions. Caldwell looked back at Max now, lying silently, eyes fixed on the hallway. "Dogs don't lie," he said. "They remember things we forget or refuse to see." Ethan clenched his hands. I thought maybe she drove off that bridge on purpose, that she was too tired, too sad, that maybe she gave up." His voice shook. But now, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The pieces were forming a different story now. One where his mother might not have simply lost control. One where someone may have wanted her gone. Max stirred again, ears twitching. Caldwell placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We're going to find out what really happened that night. All of it." But before he could speak another word, a second officer leaned in and whispered something. Caldwell's face changed. What Ethan asked quickly, Caldwell turned. "Your stepfather wasn't traveling alone. There's another boarding pass registered under his name. Same destination, different gate, woman. Mid-30s. No ID yet." Max suddenly stood rigid. His eyes locked toward the hallway. The hallway, beyond the security office, was flooded with movement, passengers dragging luggage announcements humming overhead, occasional calls for final boarding echoing through the glass and metal of the terminal. But amidst that flow, Ethan stood still, breath locked in his chest, as Max pulled slightly forward, nose high, body tense like a compass sensing true north. Caldwell had barely finished processing the information when Max nudged Ethan's hand, not frantic, but with clear intent. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply followed. His steps quickened instinctively, his hand lightly resting on Max's back, feeling the subtle guidance of a dog who had learned to track not just scent, but emotion memory and something deeper Ethan couldn't name. Caldwell called after them, "Wait, where are you going?" But Ethan didn't answer. Max didn't break stride. They moved past Gate 11, then 12, heading toward the farther end of the international terminal where fewer people gathered, where quiet seemed to collect like dust. Ethan could feel his pulse in his ears. Max turned abruptly down a side corridor, sniffing the air, tail level, each step deliberate. As they neared Gate 18B, a woman in a dark green coat stood alone near the check-in kiosk. She held her phone close to her ear, speaking rapidly in a low voice. Her features were obscured by large sunglasses and a pulled-down beanie, but Max stopped cold. He sat, then let out a single bark, not aggressive, not a warning, a signal. Ethan froze. The bark echoed against the terminal glass. The woman turned slowly. Her hand dropped from the phone. She saw Ethan. For a brief second, something in her eyes flickered recognition, then panic. She turned to walk away. Max didn't move. He simply looked up at Ethan, then back toward the woman. Ethan stepped forward. "Stop," he said, voice steady. She paused, then began walking faster. Caldwell arrived seconds later, breath short, one hand on his radio. "What's happening?" Ethan pointed. She was with him. "David, that's her." Caldwell signaled the officers already stationed along the hallway. Within moments, the woman was surrounded. Her passport revealed another false identity. Her ticket, same flight, same destination as David's. The second runner. They brought her into holding. Ethan sat back in the break room, numb, staring at the now folded notebook in his hands. Caldwell placed a hand on the table. How did Max know where she was? Ethan didn't look up. He just did. "I didn't even say anything. I didn't know where to go." Caldwell leaned in. "You sure you've never seen her before?" Ethan nodded. "No, but she knew me. I saw it. In her eyes." Caldwell exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We're digging into her records now. It's going to take time. She and David were planning this for months, but we need more. Something direct." Ethan's fingers tightened around the notebook. "There's something I never told anyone," he said quietly. "My mom, she used to record things. Audio. She said sometimes writing wasn't enough. She had this little recorder. I always thought it was gone after the crash, but I found it inside the lining of the notebook. Hidden." Caldwell straightened. "Do you have it?" Ethan reached into his backpack, pulled out a small scratched digital voice recorder, and placed it on the table. "I've never played it. I was scared." Caldwell nodded. "You want me to do it?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I need to hear it first." He clicked play. The tiny speaker buzzed for a second, then her voice. Soft, warm, familiar. It cut through the noise of the world like light under a door. "March 14th, she said. "David's been strange lately, distant. I asked about the insurance paperwork and he changed the subject. I think he's hiding something. He told me not to worry about the money. Said if anything happened to me, Ethan would be taken care of. But the way he said it didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like a plan." Ethan's face paled. His breath slowed. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. The recording continued. "Tonight, we had another argument. I told him I was meeting a friend from work, but I'm driving alone. I needed time to think. I don't trust him. If anything happens to me, if I don't come back, tell Ethan I love him. Tell him he's everything I ever did right." The recorder clicked. Silence. Ethan stared at it as if it might breathe. Caldwell reached over, pressing stop. "That's enough," he said gently. "This changes everything." Ethan looked at Max, who lay beside him, eyes watching, ears twitching. She knew. She felt it coming. Caldwell picked up the device. This isn't just grief anymore, it's evidence. She suspected premeditation. Combined with the forged documents, the cash, the getaway, this might be what pushes the investigation forward. Ethan didn't reply. He pressed the notebook to his chest, then looked at Max. "She left this for me so I wouldn't forget." Max shifted closer, resting his chin on Ethan's shoe. Caldwell's radio crackled. Another voice came through Suspect 1 requesting legal counsel. Claims no knowledge of any plan to harm spouse. Said she was already emotional. Repeats phrase, "It was just an accident." Caldwell cursed under his breath. They're going to deny everything. Ethan stood. "Let's go back to the gate." Why, Caldwell asked. "There's something I need to see again. Where Max barked, where she stood, maybe I missed something." Max was already up. His body pressed against Ethan's side as they moved toward the hallway again. The hallway leading back toward Gate 18B was quiet now. The boarding rush long gone, leaving behind only a scattering of wrappers and the ghost of movement. Ethan walked slowly, Max by his side, while Caldwell kept just behind them, eyes alert. The voice recorder still sat in Caldwell's pocket, a ticking truth yet to explode. Ethan's steps slowed as he neared this exact spot where Max had barked earlier, where the woman had paused, where something invisible had passed between past and present. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch, letting the air settle. Max stopped beside him. Not alert, just still. "She stood right here," Ethan murmured, "and when she saw me, she ran." Caldwell nodded. "Guilt knows how to hide, but it forgets how to breathe when caught." Behind them, the radio on Caldwell's shoulder crackled to life. Suspect Lanford is requesting movement to medical claims chest pain and numbness. Medical team is en route to holding. Caldwell frowned. That's too convenient. What if it's real? Ethan asked. What if he's actually sick? Caldwell shook his head. Then we treat him. But if it's a bluff, he's trying to stall. Or run. At that moment, Max lifted his head sharply. His ears pricked forward, nose twitching. His body went rigid. Ethan felt the change instantly. He had seen Max respond to loud sounds to commands, but this was different. This was instinct. Caldwell noticed it too. "What is it, Max?" he asked softly. The dog took 2 steps forward, then stopped, nose to the floor, and let out a deep low growl that rose into a sudden bark, loud, sharp-focused. Not random, not stress, a bark with direction. It was the first time Caldwell had heard that sound from Max since before the desert. He turned. "That's an alert," he said. "He's found something." Ethan felt his heart spike. Is he reacting to... David Caldwell pressed his earpiece. Control confirm current location of suspect David Lanford. A pause. Lanford was en route to Medbay Wait. Subject no longer in medical corridor. Last camera shows him detouring through secondary maintenance hallway near service exit 3A. Caldwell cursed. "He's running." Max barked again, loud, urgent. Then, without waiting, lunged forward, leash taut, guiding Ethan and Caldwell down the hallway. Caldwell radioed as he ran. "Max is active. Repeat, Max is actively tracking suspect in real time. All available units to service exit 3A." They moved fast. Max led them past the last security gate through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, down a maintenance corridor filled with cleaning carts and forgotten crates. His nose stayed low paws, sure, even as his breath grew heavier. Ethan stayed close behind, eyes locked on Max, adrenaline sharpening his every step. Ahead, the door to the service exit stood slightly ajar. Caldwell signaled for silence. Max paused, body crouched, then let out another sharp bark, and this time it echoed like a gunshot in the narrow hallway. Caldwell pushed forward, weapon drawn but held low. "Freeze!" he shouted as they entered. Inside, David Lanford stood halfway through the exit, sweat beading on his forehead, face pale, but not from illness. He held a maintenance badge in one hand and a crumpled form in the other, some kind of ID switch. His eyes darted toward Ethan, then to Max. He froze. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly, hands half raised. I was looking for help. I thought I was having a heart attack." Caldwell stepped between Ethan and the man. "Help doesn't look like forged clearance and emergency exits." David's jaw clenched. "You think this dog proves anything?" Max growled again. He took 1 step forward, head lowered, teeth bared, not attacking, but issuing a command older than language. "Stand down." Caldwell turned to the backup team entering behind them. "Get him cuffed, now. We have a K9 positive alert tied to prior evidence and attempted evasion." The officers moved in and David didn't resist. He only looked at Max, and for the first time fear flickered across his face. Back in the holding room, the atmosphere had changed. The previous calm had been replaced by layered suspicion buzzing radios and the quiet respect that followed a K9 doing what no handler had expected. The supervising officer reviewed the footage from the corridor, watching Max's behavior closely. Caldwell stood beside him. "This is the first time Max has issued a full bark alert since his combat trauma," he explained. "He only reacts when something matters. This isn't just a trained response. It's recognition." The supervisor nodded. "It's admissible as behavior-based evidence. And paired with the false documents, attempted exit, and the audio recording, it's enough for a full detain and escalation." Ethan sat silently, hands folded in his lap. Max leaned against his leg. He knew Ethan whispered. "Before I did." He always knew. Outside the room, a few junior officers murmured about Max. One of them, young and skeptical, turned to Caldwell. "That bark, how can you be sure it wasn't a coincidence?" Caldwell didn't answer immediately. He opened a video from his phone. It was footage from earlier that week, training day. Max had refused every simulated alert. No response to decoys. No reaction to substances. Flat, disengaged, until today, until Ethan. "That dog doesn't fake signals," Caldwell said finally. And if you'd seen what I've seen, if you'd seen him sit beside a body and not move for hours, you'd know he only speaks when it matters." The officers nodded. Inside, Max shifted his weight, resting his chin on Ethan's shoe again. The same gesture, the same pause. The same quiet defiance that had saved lives before, and maybe just helped save the truth now. Ethan leaned back in the chair, eyes unfocused, mind racing. The pieces were falling together fast. The coat, the notebook, the voice, the flight. And now Max's bark echoing like a verdict, not imagined, not coincidence, not luck. He reached into his bag, fingers brushing against the folded edge of a page from his mother's journal, the one he hadn't dared read aloud yet. It had a list, a short one, titled, "What to Do If Something Ever Happens." Number 3, read "Trust What Doesn't Use Words." Max licked Ethan's hand once. The room stayed quiet. The weeks that followed were quieter, not because the pain had disappeared, but because the chaos had finally paused long enough for something softer to take shape. David Lanford remained in custody as the investigation deepened. The woman he tried to flee with had turned state's witness in exchange for a deal, admitting her part in the false documentation, and helping the DA trace back financial accounts tied to suspicious transfers around the time of the accident. Ethan's voice recorder and his mother's notebook had become vital in the ongoing inquiry, but beyond the legal process there was another question to answer: where Ethan would go next. Caldwell had tried to keep Ethan under his wing as long as he could, but protocol eventually intervened. Child Protective Services had to place him temporarily until the legal mess surrounding his custody could be cleared. The placement officer, to everyone's surprise, arrived at the airport with a solution that made Caldwell raise an eyebrow. Officer Marie Vega, one of the original trainers from the K9 unit, had volunteered. Marie was in her mid-40s, her presence calm but undeniable, with a firm voice and eyes that had seen more than most. She had once overseen Max's transition back from the war zone, the difficult weeks when he wouldn't respond to basic commands, when he'd snap awake at every door creak, his body trembling for reasons no one could reach. She hadn't seen Max in almost a year. When Ethan first arrived at her small home just outside the city, he noticed how minimal everything was. No toys, no photographs, no mess. It didn't feel sterile, it just felt like something was missing. Marie didn't explain until the second night when she sat across from him on the porch, Max resting between them, watching the trees move like waves under the wind. "I used to have a son," she said simply, not looking at Ethan. 6 years old, his dad and I split in court. Bad custody battle. He took him across state lines one weekend and never brought him back. Said he'd come back when I agreed to drop the charges. I didn't." She sipped her tea. "It's been 2 years since I've seen him. Sometimes I wonder if Max sensed that when we trained together. Maybe that's why he stopped responding, maybe he saw too much loss around him." Ethan didn't know what to say, but Marie didn't seem to expect a reply. She just reached down and scratched behind Max's ear. "When I heard what happened with you, how Max reacted, I asked to take you both. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in second chances." Ethan nodded. "Me too." In the days that followed, their routine became something sacred. Morning walks with Max along the wooded trail behind Marie's house. Quiet breakfasts, where no one forced conversation, evenings spent reading old notes from Max's training logs that Marie kept in a box under her desk. Ethan learned how Max had once been the fastest responder in his unit, the way he used to identify explosives faster than any dog they'd ever trained. He also learned how, after the IED blast that killed his first handler, Max had shut down. Not just emotionally, but neurologically. The vet said his sensory reflexes had dimmed as a defense, a way to protect himself from overstimulation. What brought him back, Marie explained, was not retraining, but care. He started healing when we stopped treating him like a soldier, she said, and started treating him like someone grieving. It was during one of those nights that the letter arrived, official documentation from the airport's K9 program and the Department of Veteran Animal Services. Caldwell had pulled every string he could, and Marie had co-signed the request. Max, previously designated for retirement and probable relocation to a care facility, was now formally reassigned as an emotional support animal permanently matched with Ethan. The file noted Max's extraordinary and consistent emotional alert responses and unparalleled bonding behavior post-trauma. Ethan read the letter twice, then set it down slowly. Marie smiled faintly. "He's yours now. Not just to walk beside you, but to walk with you, through all of it." Ethan knelt by Max, wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, and whispered into his fur. Max, as always, didn't move, just leaned his weight in like he knew what was being said without hearing a word. That night, Marie handed Ethan a framed certificate. Not government-issued, not formal. Just something she had made. It read, "In memory of shared pain. In honor of shared healing, Max and Ethan." On the back, she'd written a date, March 14th. "The day everything changed," she said. "For both of you." Max began sleeping in Ethan's room, not by the door, but right by the bedhead on the mattress edge like a guardian who had finally stopped running. Ethan no longer woke up gasping. The dream still visited sometimes, but it was different now. The bark wasn't a warning anymore. It was a promise. A voice saying, "I'm here." One morning, while cleaning out an old drawer in the guest room that Marie had given him, Ethan found a tiny tag taped inside the back wall. It had once belonged to Max's first collar back when he was first deployed. It read simply, "M.A. 13 Guardian, not weapon." Ethan held it in his palm and looked over at Max, who lay by the window, sunlight streaking across his back. Marie walked by with coffee, paused, then nodded. That tag was a reminder to us that no matter where we sent him, he wasn't meant to destroy. He was meant to protect. Sometimes I think dogs know what kind of people we are before we do. Ethan smiled, rubbing the tag between his fingers. He knew about me before I did. Marie sat beside him. And now you know about him. That's why you two work. You speak the same language, one the rest of us forgot. Max stretched Rose and patted over. He nudged Ethan's hand gently, not demanding just present. Ethan looked out the window at the quiet woods, then at the folded notebook beside his bed. "I think I'm ready to write something new." Marie nodded. "Then write it, not for her, not for him, for you." Max rested his head on Ethan's foot. The air was soft that morning. Not quite cold, but filled with the kind of stillness that only comes before something important. The ceremony was set in a quiet garden near the courthouse, simple white chairs placed in even rows beneath a canopy of trees, just starting to bloom. It wasn't large, just a few close officers, Marie Caldwell, a few airport staff who had come to know Ethan, and a representative from the DA's office. The investigation had concluded 2 weeks earlier, no accident. David Lanford had been charged with involuntary manslaughter, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. The final report confirmed what Ethan had felt in his chest long before the world was ready to say it aloud. His mother hadn't simply died. She had been silenced, pushed, erased. Today wasn't a funeral. It was a recognition of truth, of her. Ethan sat quietly in the front row, a folded sheet of notebook paper in his lap, the same one he'd been staring at for days without the courage to read it aloud. Max sat beside him, calm, unmoving, wearing a simple black collar Marie had made for the occasion. It bore no badge, no title, just his name. On the small platform, a framed photo of Ethan's mother rested on an easel, her laughing at something off-camera, one hand holding back her hair, sunlight frozen in her eyes. No flowers, just her. As the ceremony began, a few people spoke short words about justice, about memory, about the kind of mother she had been. Marie said a few words steady and precise. Caldwell stepped up, eyes full but dry, and recounted the moment Max barked during the attempted escape. That bark, he said, spoke louder than any man that day. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stood slowly, paper trembling in his hands. His voice wavered at first, but steadied with every word. "I thought this day would be about closure," he said. "But I don't think that word means what we want it to. This isn't closure. It's a continuation of what she started, of what Max carried, of what I'm still learning to understand. He paused, unfolding the second half of the note. She once wrote something in her journal, a sentence I didn't understand until recently. It said, "If you can't hold me when you're sad, find Max. He knows." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. And she was right. Max didn't just know me, he knew her. He held something of her the rest of us couldn't see. That night, when she died, he stayed. And when I didn't think I could stay, he stayed again. He folded the paper and stepped down. No applause. Just quiet, the kind that means people are listening with their hearts, not their hands. Ethan sat. Max didn't move. But then slowly he rose. No command, no signal. He walked forward past the front row, past to the empty podium, and lay down directly beneath the framed photo of Ethan's mother. He rested his head on his paws and let out a deep sigh, one that reached the bottom of his lungs. Ethan watched, stunned. So did everyone else. No one had trained him to do this. No one had gestured or spoken. Max had simply chosen. Marie whispered beside him, "He remembers." Ethan nodded, blinking back something too old to be called tears. The silence stretched for a full minute before the ceremony moved on. People began to stand, mingling quietly, offering handshakes and words that never quite felt enough. Ethan remained seated, eyes still on Max. After a while, he stood and walked to the photo. He crouched beside Max and placed his hand gently on the dog's back. "We're gonna be okay," he whispered. Max didn't move, but his eyes flicked upward just once and then returned to the photograph. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on Marie's porch, the same place they had watched the trees weeks earlier. He held his mother's notebook open again, fingers brushing the corners as if afraid it might vanish. On the inside back cover, where the final pages began to wear thin, was another small note written in faded ink. Not a date, just a phrase. We leave parts of ourselves in others, sometimes the best part. He traced the words over and over. "That's you, Max," he said. "You're that part." From that day forward, Ethan walked a little straighter. His silences weren't heavy anymore, they were thoughtful. His dreams no longer woke him with dread, and Max remained by his side not as a memory, not as a protector, but as something older, something steady. A quiet witness to grief, to love, to the way both can share a name and still mean hope. They didn't return to the airport for a long time. When they did, it wasn't to remember the bad. It was to visit the people who'd helped him find his voice again. As they walked through Terminal C, a small child pointed at Max and asked her mother, "Is he a hero?" The mother smiled. "Yes," she said, "but not the kind on TV, the kind that listens." And somewhere in the soft, quiet place between memory and healing, Ethan reached down, ran his hand along Max's back, and whispered, "Thank you." Max licked his hand once, just once, and the world kept turning. Not like before, but forward. Always forward. If this story moved you even just a little, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more than you know. I'm curious, which moment hit you the hardest? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts.